Hey, everybody, and welcome to The Analyst, a podcast made here in Ontario by ONTABA. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Jaime Santana, and I'll be your host. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst and a registered behavior analyst here in Ontario, and I primarily work with youth and adults with developmental disabilities. I'm super excited to come back as the host and to talk to some wonderful people. Today, we are actually having a conversation with Jessica Cauchi, who is the president of ONTABA, and Brian Mason, who is the president-elect of ONTABA. Super exciting to having both of you on the Analyst today. It's been a little while since our last episode, so we're happy to bring it back and revive it. Jessica and Brian have both been dedicated volunteers with ONTABA for many years, and they've served in a variety of roles within the organization. Jessica is currently the president of ONTABA, and she is an assistant professor at Brock, as well as a behavior consultant, and she has over 20 years of experience in the field. She is also a BCBA and an RBA in Ontario. Brian is a manager of special education, inclusion, and equity, and has over 25 years of experience in the field, and is also a BCBA and an RBA. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Okay, to get started, I think a lot of our people want to know more about you, who you are, what you do, and your relationship with ONTABA. So, Jess, starting with you, how long have you been involved with ONTABA, and what excites you the most about serving as the current president?
So only a few years that I've been involved with ONTABA recently, although in the past sort of floated in and out of a couple of things. What excites me the most, honestly, this year is that we just have such a great board this year. Not to diminish other years, Jaime, but we just have a group this year that is so invested and so motivated, and I mean, already working so hard and committed to getting things done. They came at this year with ideas already, so everybody sort of hit the ground running, and so it's a nice energy, and it's a nice sort of focus on exciting events and things for the year. So
that makes your job as president a little bit easier. Having people
not
who
too
are
much. I can just sit back and be like, oh, yeah, carry on. It's great.
Yeah. It's super easy when people are all in and engaged and ready to kind of move the needle forward. Brian, same question for you. How long have you been with ONTABA, and what excites you most about serving as president-elect of ONTABA?
Sure. On and off for about 10 or 12 years. I'm not too sure. I've been a part of different working groups in the past. Mm-hmm. And I think what probably excites me, so absolutely what Jess has said, we have some really cool people that I've had a chance to meet over the last 6 months or so, and the diversity of people that bring sort of their own expertise and their own ideas. I mean, ultimately, I really like systems levels views of things. So I'm curious and excited about taking a look at ONTABA as a provincial organization from the south to the north and the east and the west. To me, it's all of those different things, and I want to see what people bring to the table. So, yeah,
that's super exciting too. And if you're a systems guy, welcome to the right place, because there's lots of systems within ONTABA, and it's super exciting to hear that you're also bringing the approach of covering all of Ontario. And I feel like as an association, we've been doing that a lot over the last, 10 to 12 years. We've started to expand and really pay attention to the north. Is there, to those north and northeast and stuff, is there anything specific that ONTABA's planning this year to support with those folks, or to bring more people in from outside of the GTA?
I think a couple of things. Continuing to offer lots of webinar-based stuff, I think, is our easiest way to make this accessible for not just across Ontario, but we are getting, attendees to events that are outside Ontario, that are in Canada and different parts of Canada or in different parts of the world, which I think is super cool. But that's it. That's our easiest way to say, this is easy for everybody. Our Evening for Behavior Analysis this year is in a different location than we were last year. So last year we were out in London. This year we're heading a bit farther east of the GTA core. So I will leave that until that comes more formally. But again, with an intent of, where can we move to and where can we think about? And so just sort of exploring, what works for people in different places.
That's awesome. I think that's really inclusive, and it's exciting to know that we're going to be traveling somewhere east in Ontario.
Yeah.
What do you both hope to accomplish in your roles as president and president-elect? Jess, I'll start with you.
You should start with Brian because his answer is going to be much more appropriate than mine, I'm sure. When I first moved into the role of president-elect with Jaime as president, I was very honest about like the thing I care most about is that I want people to love ABA. I want our province to remember that we love ABA, that, you know, this thing that we get to do is so cool and it's so different than other things. And this is our job and this is our science and it's so exciting. And so, you know, we and the world have had a bumpy couple of years. We've had COVID, we've had, you know, regulation changes, which are wonderful, but still changes, right? And, you know, ups and downs in terms of the state of the world generally. And so we've had a heavy go for a little while, I think. And I think sometimes in those situations, we sort of get stuck in the day to day and we get stuck in the, you know, this is what I do today and this day was hard. And we kind of forget the macro level or the big picture of like, look what we're doing. We get to marry the coolest things and take science and use it to change the world in better ways. And so honestly, as much as we have so many like, you know, real work things to do, my biggest goal is that I want people to remember that our field is exciting and to be excited about what they get to do.
Yeah, and I've been having a lot of conversations with behavior analysts, and a lot of them are saying the same thing. Like, we have such a great science, and we all know and fall back on it, but I think we've kind of stopped having fun with it and enjoying it and embracing it for the amount of fun that we can have with it. So before I get to you, Brian, let me ask you a follow-up question, Jess. What is one thing that a behavior analyst can start doing differently to kind of fall back in love with behavior analysis?
I'm going to give two things because I don't want to play by your rules, Jaime. I think one is to look at a way to apply the science to your own behavior. Yeah. Pick something small, pick a habit, pick something that is meaningful to you, an exercise goal, a studying goal, whatever, and really, you know, actually set that out. Create a data collection system for yourself. Do some self-monitoring of your behavior. Really reflect on what you thought you were doing compared to what was actually happening. Find a way to apply that science in a meaningful way to your own life. I think that's an easy reminder, that, oh yeah, sometimes we think we're doing better than we really are. And we need some of that data. We need some of that measurement. And so I think finding a way to do that in your own personal life helps reconnect. And then find a silly way. Yeah. Pick something that is, you know, training your animal to do something silly, teaching, you know, a little niece or a nephew or something cool, shaping a squirrel to come and, you know, eat food out of your hand from across your backyard. Like, just find us something that's kind of superfluous and silly and doesn't really matter, but is such a nice reminder of how cool it is to shape another organism's behavior and to see some of those steps and just sort of play around with something a little bit that way.
That's really cool. And it also gives you something to brag about. Do you see what I can get my pet to do? Yeah. That's awesome. That's really good advice. Brian, jumping back to you, what do you hope to accomplish as president-elect who will be stepping into presidency in a couple of years?
Oh, a whole bunch of things. My goodness. So one, I think right off the top is listening to people like you, Jaime, that you've been in the role, listening to people like Jess, who has great ideas and has some experience. And so honestly, just generally, you should listen. You should listen really closely and in the moment and just really try to soak it up. I'm really excited about meeting students and newly minted RBAs. I think this is an interesting time for us with a CPBAO, and I want to make sure that, again, we continue the work, Jaime, that you've done and others have done to set us up on a good course. So I think there's still some work to be done there. So I'm looking forward to that, but also how that impacts some of our new RBAs and what that looks like. I think the other piece is I always want to make sure that we have sort of ethics and cultural sensitivity and knowledge in that way running in the background, always in the background. But I think we can sort of have fun, like we've already been talking about. We can have fun with this stuff. We just have to have those checks and balances every once in a while. or somebody who is a confidant or mentor that we can sort of bounce ideas off of, and to make sure that we're still sort of staying within our lane in the scope, but having fun with it while the other things like the ethics pieces are just running in the background all the time. So yeah, a bit of that. I might train a squirrel to take a nut from my hand. Who knows?
I'm a little surprised you haven't done that already, if I'm going to be honest. So
yeah. So all those things, like it's still kind of early days for me to think sort of really broadly, but I'm excited about it nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember when I stepped in as president-elect, it was exciting, it was scary, it was fun, it was it was like all of these big emotions all into one. But what really did help me was listening to past presidents and, taking advice from those folks who have been in the role or who've been big parts of ONTABA, who've played big roles in ONTABA in our 30 plus years of existence. So I think that's a really good approach. Jess?
I want to add to my answer. Can I add to my answer before we move on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm not sure it'll come up in something else, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about it. One of the other, I was thinking a little bit when Brian was talking about, the stuff that's running in the background and paying attention to cultural competencies and ethics and those sorts of things. And I think something that has been running in the background for ONTABA for a few years and is really starting to move a bit forward more quickly is thinking about our identity as a Canadian organization.
Yeah.
And really looking at, we get a chance to work with other provinces and other provincial organizations and learn from them and help them, grow in different ways and think about some of the challenges across our country in terms of behavior analysis. But I think for many reasons, the last year or so and the next year or so are probably that's becoming increasingly important to really think about, how do we support other Canadian organizations, and how do we start to think about, what does Canadian behavior analysis look like, and what does our identity look like as this field across our country? And so I think that's always been there, but I think it's creeping up a little bit more and more over the next little bit, and I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I think, when we started working with the other associations, there's lots of things that are happening, and a lot of them look towards ONTABA to see what we're doing and how we can support. So it's really good that we're building those really strong relationships across the provinces and working collaboratively with them to find our, like you said, our Canadian identity within behavior analysis, because the landscape here is different than that of our neighbors and that of ABA everywhere. So to kind of find that is really cool. And I think it's really important work. So I'm glad you're doing that, and that ONTABA is taking that as something that's really important. Brian, a little bit earlier, you mentioned you want to connect with students and you want to kind of talk to them and get to know them more. If a student is listening right now, what advice would you want them to hear about the association, about behavior analysis in general? What would you want to share with them?
I'd start by just saying that ONTABA is here for them. Like we are in service to the members of ONTABA. And again, thinking of all parts of the province, if there are questions, if there are concerns, this can be one of the guiding organizations, amongst others, that can really help, I think, in support of good, ethical, accountable behavior analysis. I'm excited about individuals pushing the boundaries, some of the research that they're doing and some of the practice that they're doing to kind of push the boundaries of behavior analysis. And we know that the scope can be so broad and so wide, provided that you have the competencies to work within that scope. So I think that's a pretty important reminder. Find your people. And there are lots of people out there, but you've got to find your people. It might take a bit of work to build or generate like a professional learning group or a PLC, to get them sort of speaking with like-minded individuals to help them sort of contact both the literature, but also just to validate their practice, but then sort of keep everyone sort of interested in their own practice. So I love the expansion of the scope, but I also think it's really important that people feel that although they may feel at times that they're a bit on their own, they shouldn't feel that way, right? There's ONTABA, there are other local organizations that really are there to support them.
That's really great advice. I really like the find your people piece because I feel like that's been really hard for a lot of folks, especially folks who are like, new RBAs or have been long-term RBAs but are working independently. They're consultants, they run their own practice. It can be really isolating when you're like working solo, when you're on your own. So finding that group of people, I think, is really important. I think over the last few years, ONTABA especially has done a really good job with the release of the SIGs. And we have, how many SIGs are you up to now? I think about 10 more?
Not more, but they vary in level of sort of current activity.
Yeah.
Our newest is our adult services SIG, so that's a pretty exciting addition for us.
That is exciting. And it's really good that, you're creating that opportunity for folks to find their people, to find their group,
Yes.
to meet other people. And I found being a member of ONTABA, being on the board of ONTABA allowed me to do that. It really allowed me to meet other like-minded people, get to know more people in the field, and just kind of network and build a relationship. So that's really good advice. Since you're both going to be taking ONTABA into the future, where would you hope the association is in the next 10 years?
In terms of growth, in terms of what we're doing?
Both. Let's go with both.
Anything. I think goals that I would love to see over the next few years is I think, ONTABA has a nicely established history of being our province's professional resource. Sort of like Brian said, we are here to serve members. And so, I think over the years that I've been involved in this field, we've seen different needs, right? We've seen things that people need in terms of resources. Think about, just when regulation came through, and then it became abundantly clear to us very quickly that there's a lot of stuff that we need to help members figure out. And so we did, right? And so we mobilized some people that were great at this, and you and I spent some time doing this and really figured out, how do we respond to what our members need? And so I think that responsiveness is important on an ongoing basis, right? Being able to look at what's happening in our province, what's happening with our members, what's happening in our field, and continue to create supports and resources and things that are accessible to people easily and broadly, and gives a good guiding sort of moral compass for behavior analysts, but also practical resources. It's fine to say this is what we should do. Go ahead, off you go do that thing. And, then if we're leaving people without here's what you actually can do, though, I think that's hard. So I think we need to keep both of those in balance. But I think continuing to reach people across the province that are existing behavior analysts, like Brian, I'm really excited about newly minted RBAs and students and people that are just starting in this part, I think is so exciting. But also I would love to spend a little bit more time, showing the rest of the world how cool our field is, right? And so being able to show up a little bit better in other disciplines, in other, going to other conferences and attending other places, and, letting other folks know a little bit more about behavior analysis. And, maybe they start to attend some of our stuff and they're interested in some of our stuff. But I think disseminating a little bit more broadly to say, hey, this is who we are and this is what we do. And maybe you're not a behavior analyst, but it's probably great if you know a little bit about what we can do. So we've talked a lot over the last few years as a field about how do we keep broadening and applying this really cool science to lots of different things. But we have to show people. We can't just say, we're really important, pick us, listen to us. We have to show them what we can do. So I think over the next 10 years, if we can start to stretch out a little bit, I think that would be nice.
That's a really cool forward thinking idea. Brian?
So many good ideas, Jessica. Let me see if I can add a few.
This is why I need Brian to be like, okay, so hold this in a little bit and figure out what you're actually going to do, though.
Okay, so I'll start wide and go a bit more narrow. So if I think sort of broad or really wide, I think about ONTABA as a provincial organization and how can we connect with other provinces and understand what they're doing, right? All kinds of good stuff, I'm sure, that's happening in the East Coast and the West Coast and Central that we can learn from, that we can share. We're a small country, relatively speaking, so I think we want to make sure that we can share our own practices. We can have speakers, and we can listen to others that represent sort of a Canadian perspective. I don't know if we're going to diverge or merge with what's happening in the States, but I'll never make any assumptions that way. But either way, I think it's important that we just, we have a bit of a Canadian voice at the table all the time.
Yeah.
I think that we should also be considering the future of 10 years from now. How are we going to be harnessing things like technology and AI? That is a really big thing, even though we work with individuals, or it's a human service in many ways. That will absolutely have a major impact on how we understand things, how we coordinate things, how we generate new ideas and programs, et cetera, like everything, I think. 10 years from now, absolutely. So I think we have to be prepared for that and listen to that. But think of it as an opportunity. It's coming anyway. So it's an opportunity for us, I think, to be able to harness some of that, which is when I will promptly look to some of our younger members to say, okay, help us out with this.
Yeah.
I'm trying, but I'm a bit slow in the uptake.
That's super exciting. And I feel like the AI section specifically, it's like it's inevitable. It's everywhere. Like I can't open an email anymore without Gemini saying, this is what the email's about, right? Like even if I don't want to use AI, it's built into almost everything. So kind of providing some resources for clinicians to kind of use those effectively is really important. And I think ONTABA has done a really good job at this historically. When COVID happened, within a week, we had resources out for people to do virtual sessions, which had at that point rarely ever been done by behavior analysts. When regulation happened, when all these big changes are happening, ONTABA is quick to respond. So it's really exciting to see that you're already thinking of what's in the future, what's coming down the pipeline in the future that we can't avoid, and to provide people with some of those resources as to, like Jess said, not just here's what you got to do, go do it, but like here's what you got to do, here's how you can do it. Now go off and practice, and we're here as a resource for you if you need any additional support. So that's really exciting.
I have conversations with some of the behavior analysts that I work with closely, and some teachers as well. If you're looking to differentiate some curriculum for a student, let's say a student with Down syndrome, and you want to differentiate that curriculum, but still make sure that they're part of the classroom, right? Use AI, right? Those are just the tip of the iceberg of ways that we can begin to differentiate and target and individualize all kinds of different strategies and curricula. So
that's exciting.
Like you, I am slow to the uptake, especially when I look at like what my kids use AI for, and it's wild. But I think so much about how much of my life I have spent individualizing teaching materials at all levels, and in trainings and like, big group things, and in like individual one-on-one work with people, and how much of my life I spent thinking, I wish this resource existed. And I'm like, that's so cool. It's so cool that we can have so much easy control over how we are teaching things, and being able to just sort of generate some of that stuff. So it's low-hanging fruit is easy.
Yeah.
There's some people doing great work on sort of big data set stuff in AI, and how to really evaluate, what variables are impacting individuals' performances in different types of, therapeutic environments. And so I think that is never going to be something that I am good at. And I really struggle to even stay with you when you're talking about it. But I think it's so cool, and there's so many cool applications. And this may be part of how we get from a science that not exclusively, but primarily has focused on individual and single subjects. And for much of the world, that's hard to talk to us about, right? That's hard to relate to. This may be part of how we really start to bridge that sort of individual single subject part to also big impact, big data, big changes.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely have a big role to play in the future of our science, as soon as we figure out kind of the ethics and the protection of personal health information and all of that. I definitely do think AI has a role to play in ABA and how we kind of practice. So it's super exciting, and I definitely look forward to seeing the resources that you put out. Jess, a little bit earlier.
We look forward to seeing your resources, not mine.
ONTABA's resources. Jess, a little bit earlier, you encouraged people to go to conferences outside of the field, to go to other professions conferences, to kind of mingle with other professions. In your opinion, what can behavior analysts learn from other fields? And how can we be better at teaching them about ABA and behavior analysts?
It's funny, this past weekend in lectures that I was teaching in class, and also this morning, we were talking about very much some of these things and this conceptualization of like, when we talk about multidisciplinary work, we say, oh yeah, the client that I work with also has an SLP, and sometimes I talk to them and, work on the same goals, or, their classroom teacher and I can collaborate on some of these things. And that's okay. And I think that's sort of our base level of like multidisciplinary collaboration. But what about businesses? What about, again, some of like Brian's wheelhouse of like systems level things?
Mm-hmm.
What about whole provincial systems? What about our, what kinds of efficiencies we could look at in hospital settings and higher institution settings? And I mean, the justice system and child welfare systems. I think there's so many big pieces that we could be contributing towards, but we can't go storming in places and say, hold up, we know better. We're behavior analysts. We can fix your problems. We need to go and listen to people and learn about what's happening in other systems a little bit differently, and sort of think about, are there ways that we have some ideas that could help here, and can we learn a little bit more outside of our little bubble? Sometimes I think we get stuck in because we're so used to being able to control so much of the environment in our perspective, we sometimes forget that most of people's lives is not like that. And so if we're going to make real meaningful differences in any place, we have to pause a little bit, I think, and listen and talk, and we can pull great things. And maybe they're not behavior analytic, right? Maybe I'm listening to a medical talk, or I'm listening kind of following it maybe a little bit. Maybe I'm listening to a great, psych talk, or a social worker, and it's maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's not, really behavior analytic. Maybe it's not as, clear as I would like. Maybe the data is a little bit fuzzier than I would like, but who cares? That's not the point. The point is there's something here. There's a behavior here, and there's a behavior that we can look at, an interplay between a behavior and an environment. And, there are things that give us a place for that. So I think we have to be a little bit more humble in how we approach learning from different fields. 100%. That's a really long path to your answer.
and I agree completely. I think we need to be a little bit more humble. Like, we know where our skill sets are and how we can help, but I think learning from other professions is helpful in many ways. I found that just the language alone, like Brian, I'm sure working in the school board, this, what we call shaping, teachers will call scaffolding. So if we can use their language when we're in their settings, you get that buy-in immediately. And I've also found that help when I'm like working with parents, right? If I'm working with a parent who's an accountant, then maybe I want to know a little bit about accounting so that I can talk about reinforcement as an economic thing. Same thing if I'm talking about teachers or whatever it is. But learning that language from those fields has been super helpful to kind of build that rapport and allow people to kind of drop their guards and listen. So Brian, you work in the school board, teachers, principals, a whole bunch of different professions. Same question for you. How can we learn from other fields? What can we learn from other fields? And what have you done to kind of make your impact on the school board or with teachers a little bit more accessible or easier for them to reuptake?
Where should I start? So I think the one good practice I would suggest for RBAs, young and old, new and older, who knows, that you can see behavior analysis in all kinds of things. I think Jamie brought up a good point. If you're going to talk about accounting, right, there's behavior analysis in there somewhere, right? If you talk about retail, there's all sorts of behavior analysis principles that are in play. Same with teaching, same with all sorts of other positions. So that's a good challenge for us, I think. But in order to do that, we have to listen first. So listen, right? Hear what people have to say, take some of that information in, and then even if you need to reframe it as, okay, where am I seeing the behavioral analytic principles at play here? Because I guarantee there will be some. And then work from that point using sort of common language. I mean, to me, it's a great skill. And it's an important one that we should practice. So as we're in conversations with other people, I think it's a great thing to rehearse or practice, how you're just going to come through with really common language, really practical terms, common language. Always focus on the student or the learner in this case, and that will help you out. What we found out back, somebody mentioned earlier about the years of COVID. Well, as we ran programs, because we were committed to having students with disabilities or special education needs into our schools physically, and we did all the precautions. What that allowed us to do was slow everything down, which was amazing. And by slowing things down, it allowed us to listen, which I mentioned, but it also allowed us to really explore rationale, a common rationale for why we're doing what we're doing. And so for anybody that's listened to me and spend time around me, they'll know that eventually I'm going to mention rationale, right? If you lead with rationale, just to sort of give people a bit of an idea and a bit of a picture of where we might want to go and why this is going to be important for the student or the learner, they're going to get some buy-in. Like you're going to be able to sort of begin to have sort of other things. I think it's really incumbent that we spend time in classrooms, in the hallways, on the playgrounds, after school, during pickup, when parents are coming. It is such a cool time to see that whole range of things. Honestly, pickup time, I love it. I love when the parents, the grandparents, the aunt, uncle, whomever, they come and the love and the joy, but you see that connection there, even if it's been a particularly challenging day, you see that connection there and that fills your bucket for sure.
Yeah.
So I think seeing all different aspects of that, and then listing the rationale are just a handful of the pieces that I would say you have to have each day.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I feel like filling your bucket, talking about that is really important, I think, because a lot of us work with clients with really difficult behaviors, right? And our days can be challenging. So finding the positives in those tough days, like you were saying, and seeing the little smiles that come up because of something you did or something somebody around your client did, making the most out of those little moments has been really impactful. And that's really great advice. And I think making yourself available, like Jess was saying, right? Making yourself available, being in those hallways, being in those playgrounds, it lets your people know that you're not just, there to write a paper and give them a program to run, but you're fully invested.
Absolutely.
And be a person, right?
Thank you.
One of Brian and my common mentors is Mary Jane Weiss. And that's some of her ethics guru, Mary Jane Weiss, some of her biggest recommendations when she teaches students is don't be weird. Be ethical and do the right things, but don't be weird. We are weird a lot. We are formal. We are rigid. We are, we are coming in with writing and data and stop and talk to people a little bit. Act like a person. Remember they're a person. Genuinely chat. We sometimes check off boxes that we think are rapport building to say, I did say this and I asked about your weekend. And it's a little bit different. And I think we have to just spend some time in every setting we're in.
Yeah.
Really just genuinely sort of remembering that we're talking about people and other people's behavior they're still attached to people. And so I think that don't be weird and sort of just be a little bit goes a long, long way.
That's really great advice. Being human, I think, is something that I've learned over the last 5 or so years in my career, where it's like, being a behavior analyst and being a professional doesn't necessarily mean being detached from everything around you and the people that you're working with, right? Like you can have some level of emotional investment, of course, within boundaries to the people you're working with and the supervisees that you have, and that doesn't make you unprofessional or it doesn't push you away from ethics.
No. One of my favorite paraphrase, slightly butchered Pat Fryman quotes comes from his There's No Such Thing as a Bad Boy paper, and talks about like he believes that all behavior analysts are truly intending to do work that makes the world a better place or someone's life better. And I think that's true. I think not just behavior analysts, but lots of us that work in fields to educate, to help, to teach, to support other people. We're here because we want to make somebody's life better. And so I think if we approach, sort of underlying Brian's like what's the rationale? I think that's it, is that if we're going into situations with other folks and saying, I'm here and I assume that they're here for the same reason. We are all here because we are trying to improve something. And we all know that sometimes we get caught up in a little bit of, our own ego and our own perspective, right? If we can kind of back up a little bit and sort of say, like, everyone's coming from a good place here. I think that helps us work better with other people as well.
That's really good advice, Brian.
Yeah, I just want to add that as we sort of talk around, us being in a little bit of a bubble and a few other things, there's so much great literature out there that if we want to expand, and we should challenge ourselves and expand beyond the behavior analytic journals, there's great information out there, right? In education journals and psychology journals and psychiatric journals, mental health journals, there's all kinds of really great stuff in there that we can incorporate into our practice. And with that, I think comes the addition of understanding some of the language or terms that they use, understanding some of the approaches they use. We can make it behavior analytic. I know we can, but it gets some of that stuff. There's so much out there. It's really good reading.
That's awesome advice.
I would add, there's so many ways that information is so much more accessible than it used to be, right? Not just in terms of like, can I get my hands on it, but like, can I consume it? The rise of things like podcasts and webinars and, I can remember spending, much of my life trying to read through like genetics articles years ago and being like, I'm really relying on this peer review process here because I clearly have no idea what is happening here. But there's so many easy ways for us to get sort of first steps of information in other fields, right? And to just, throw on a different type of podcast when you're driving or, take an hour and pick a different type of webinar or something that it may or may not be of the scientific rigor that a journal article is, but it might be enough to pique some curiosity. It might be enough to start and to sort of, think, oh, this is something I'd like to learn more about. And then we can be good scientists from there.
Yeah. And I like that idea of like, expanding your comfort zone, so to speak, right? Learn about other professions, listen to other professions' languages, be involved with other things, and access kind of that information. I think that's really great advice from both of you. And I'm really happy, Jess, that you brought up the be a human comment. That's really exciting because I think we forget that a lot. And your work, Jess, you really focus on kind of progressive ABA, quality of life outcomes, sexuality, and rapport building. How does progressive ABA, or is it different from kind of the traditional approaches of ABA?
Yes and no, not really, right? Really just thinking about, how are we responding to our clients, whoever the client might be, whether the client is an organization, whether the client is a room of students, whether the client is a somewhere that I'm giving a talk to or a client that I'm sitting in the chair with. But for me, a lot of that and what sprung into from there, a lot of rapport building work was thinking about the difference between rule governed behavior and contingency shaped behavior, right? We train a lot of behavior analysts in a rule governed behavior sort of way. Ethically, right? You must do this and you must do this and you must do that, but also in sort of procedures, right? You follow a most to least prompting hierarchy. You follow a least to most prompting hierarchy. You follow, you do this type of formal preference assessment. And the reality is in many cases, really work, or it might work for a little while, but not as well as just getting good at watching your learner and watching the person that you're serving and you're working with and sort of saying, okay, great. This worked for me this morning. You've had it with me. I can see that. So what am I going to do differently? How am I going to change my behavior? Instead of just saying, this is what I'm taught to do, how am I taking what I'm taught to do and still following behavior analytic rules and principles and all of these things, but also really looking at what is the situation need and what does my learner need right now? And how am I changing to account for that? And so I think when you start to do that in clinical work, then that gets better across the board, right? If I'm running a training or I'm running a workshop and I'm watching people and they are like, yes, this is great. And they're nodding and they're smiling. Then I'm like, we're killing it. Keep going. But if I'm looking at them and they look disengaged and they look like they just fundamentally do not agree with what I'm saying, I can keep going because that's how I did it last time I did a workshop and that was great. Or I can pause and think, okay, this group needs something different. How am I going to change what I'm doing for this group? And so I think as our field has become more established, right? We've understood ourselves as a science in a bubble, and we needed to build a science and understand, with good internal validity and good control, this is what the laws of behavior look like. Now, if we're going to really use it to make meaningful changes at any level, we need to be a lot more responsive. We need to be a lot more flexible. We need to be a lot more contingency shaped and adjusting what we're doing.
I love that. It goes back to kind of being that scientist practitioner, right? Not being scared to try things that are different within certain parameters in order to benefit your client. Trying different things to see what will work. I really like that. And I feel like that makes a really big change, right? When you're building rapport, when you're kind of trying to figure out the next steps of your session. And with quality of life outcomes, we can't ignore the fact that, sexuality is a big part of the human experience. But what first drew you to that research in sexuality and sexuality education for individuals with exceptional learning needs?
I didn't start there, right? I started, like many of us did, working in EIBI with little kids with autism, and we didn't think about sex ed at all, and it was great. There was no problem. And then as I slowly started to work with more adolescents and young adults, it just became so clear that a lack of teaching in this area could impact every part of life.
Mm-hmm.
So, I could teach great workplace readiness skills and you could be killing it at work. But if you touch that beautiful person every time they walked past you, you were going to be fired, even if you were great at everything else. Right. And so it just became this undeniable area that felt like we were doing such a disservice to clients if we weren't addressing some of this, both in terms of safety, in terms of overall access to other environments, and in terms of quality of life, in terms of, these are big parts of adult experience. And we're ignoring that for so many of the folks that we serve. I did not ever think, hey, I want to have a job where I get to say penis to strangers all the time and pretend that it's great. Like that's not what I planned to do. But it also then, as I started to look at research and say, okay, so fine, I will do this. Let's figure out how to do it. Turns out we didn't have very much research at all on how to do any of this stuff. So I kind of dug my heels in for a little bit. And then eventually that's what made me go back to school. And then eventually I got the opportunity to get to work with Peter Gerhardt, which was, obviously the best place I could learn some of this stuff from. And so kind of similarly to when we talked about resources for ONTABA, it's one thing to be able to criticize when we see gaps in our field, right? And to be able to say, hey, we're not doing this well, or we should be doing this better, and to be annoyed by those. And I think that's fine. I'm a person that gets fueled by, all the things that I think are terrible. And I think that's okay. But we can't expect people to do differently if we don't have any resources to help them do differently, right? So I think if we want to, if I want to stop getting consultations for, adolescents and adults that have never been taught some of these skills, we have to make it easier for behavior analysts to know what to teach and how to do it. And so that doesn't apply just to sexuality education. That applies to so many areas that we could be in. But I think we have to, if we're going to complain about it, we have to be willing to try to contribute towards it. So I am trying to contribute towards it. But some of the reasons there's not a lot of sex ed research is it's really hard.
Yeah.
So,
I personally am very thankful for the research that you do. Working with youth and adults with developmental disabilities, I'm almost talking about masturbation and penises and vulvas and, all the things that make everybody else uncomfortable almost daily. And I've had to kind of teach myself to be comfortable in that discomfort, because if I'm not doing that for my clients, if we're not having those conversations, we're missing a big gap in skill development. So I'm really glad there's people like you that are doing that. And you mentioned the need for people to have those specific skills and get comfortable and expand those skills to benefit their clients. What are some key skills do you think that a student might want to start developing early in order to help them practice ethically, compassionately, and effectively?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think I'm going to sound like a broken record. I think loving the science is your first step.
Yeah.
I think if you are drawn into a field where there's not a lot of fields like this, right? There's not a lot of fields where you get to be a scientist practitioner, where you get to do science and evaluate what you're doing in a clear, systematic, geeky sort of way, and also really meaningfully contribute towards somebody's life, right?
Yeah.
Like there's only a handful of fields that really truly get to balance both of those. And so I think if you get to be a part of a field that does, really leaning into both sides of that, really, I think if you understand behaviorism as a science fundamentally, then you are much more able to be flexible. You're much more able to be, responsive because it just all is easy, right? You understand stimulus control in all of these ways. You understand reinforcement in all of these ways. And so you don't have to really be so procedural because it's just so easy to sort of follow once you really understand the fundamentals of that. So I think that's really, really important. And so being in educational and supervision experiences where you get that, I think is really important. The other piece I think is you find mentors, you find people that love what they do, you find people that are excited about what they do, that put themselves in uncomfortable places, right? I think about both of you and some of the conversations, Jamie, you and I have had about clients, but also, thinking about Brian when he started in the school board and he's like, hey, we're going to really care about this behavior analysis thing. You have to find people that are doing those things in meaningful ways and that care about what they're doing, and that will balance the heart side, I think.
Yeah.
And then once you can do that, then you can do, filling in competencies related to specific populations or specific diagnoses or specific ages. That part's easy. I can find people that can teach me about a new population. I can find people that can teach me, the intricacies of a certain setting. It's much harder to find somebody that is a great scientist and passionate. And so I think when you find those people, you hang on to those people, and the rest will be easier to fill in.
So if I'm hearing correctly, the short form of all that advice, which was great, is find the passion, find your passion in ABA and how you can implement ABA passionately and hold on to that really strongly and be open to learning in a variety of settings.
Always. We don't know so much, any of us.
Yeah. And to be effective in the field, I think we all know rapport is super crucial, right? If you don't have strong rapport, you don't have a learner that's learning. What are some ways that you encourage behavior analysts to build strong rapport with the individuals and the families that they're supporting?
Don't be weird. I think that's our biggest, especially when we're thinking about not just individual learners, right? But we have to build rapport with families, with other educators, with other professionals, in all sorts of ways. And I think, sometimes, especially with families and in the kind of work that I get to do, I'm going in and I'm expecting families to tell me some of their scariest, darkest parts of their life, right? They're going to tell me about the stuff that their child of whatever age engages in that they're so worried about, and they're scared that they're going to hurt somebody, that they're going to get hurt, and so, I have to work to make sure that person in a very short amount of time is going to feel okay with me and safe with me and comfortable with me, or you're not going to tell me everything. And then I'm starting from a place of misinformation. And so we forget that human part, right? We forget that this is a parent talking about the most important person in their whole life and they're terrified, right? Or this is a classroom teacher that is trying so hard to do the best for 25 kids and is going home every night exhausted.
Yeah.
And so we have to create those spaces. And I think the same with learners, right? We have to figure out, what do you care about? What makes you feel comfortable? What makes you, feel like this is going to be a good place to go forward from learning? It doesn't mean you have to be happy all the time. It means you have to figure out, how do I show you that I'm on your side? So that when we have to do things that are harder and that are maybe more uncomfortable, you still know that I've got your back. I'm still here to try and be on your side and help you.
That's really awesome advice. Taking showing and being really kind of genuine about
Yeah.
how on their side you are. Because it's one thing to say, like, buddy, I'm here to help you, but it's another one to show them and be real. And I think the difference comes in that rapport building when your client finally gets that you're real and you're for them. And when it comes to parents, like a lot of us are going into their homes. That is like a
Yes.
huge private,
Yes.
this is where people go and spend their lives in private, where nobody shares anything and everything stays
Yeah.
within their homes, family events, etc. So the fact that we're in there is such a huge sign of vulnerability from the families.
Yeah.
And I think reciprocating that by being human is super important.
And intrinsically, even though I don't think any of us are going in saying, excuse me, parent, what you're doing is wrong. I'm going
Yeah.
to tell you what the right thing is to do. But by nature, we kind of are, because
Mhm.
we're going in and we're saying, here's this thing you're doing. I'm going to create a plan that does this thing instead, which has this underpinning of because your thing is right. It's hard. We have to be really, this
Yeah.
is being a parent is hard. I used to think about it when my kids would have piano lessons and our piano teacher would come to our house and the dog is barking and I'm in my pajamas and the house is a mess and how self-conscious of that I was. And then thinking, and this is nothing. This is like half-hour piano teacher that's like my neighbor. Like this
Yeah.
doesn't matter at all. So we have to think about that.
I think that's really good advice. And a little bit earlier, you mentioned, Brian kind of starting ABA and like introducing ABA to the school board where he works. So, Brian, you work at the systems level in education. In that level or in that setting, what does behavior analysis look like when you're implementing it district wide?
Great question. So, to be honest, it looks a bit messy.
Yeah.
Most days, right? There are all kinds of things going on. There are no breaks, right? From Monday to Friday, generally speaking, 30 hours a week, we have students coming in. And if Tuesday was a bad day, they're back in on Wednesday. And if Wednesday was a bad day, they're back in on Thursday. But that's okay, right? We're going to find a way. So there's all kinds of things at play. And many of the variables we may not have any control over. So if social reactions in the hallway or in the classroom, we have very little control over those students that might react in a certain way. We don't know the learning history of lots of teachers. And honestly, I have such high, tremendous respect for teachers and the work that they do, as I've been in every different school in the district. I maintain that respect because it's really hard work to
Yeah.
differentiate and make sure they're managing and giving attention as best they can to everyone. I'm also seeing things like there are all sorts of procedures and policies, as there should be in any school system or any large organization, basically. But schools, I mean, it's a heavily regulated profession or field. So we are at the behest of the ministry, right on down to each individual school district or school board. So we have to make sure that we understand some of those variables, and some of those aren't changing. So we have to, how do we align with what's there, with the culture of the schools, with the variables that are there that we can't change, and then try to identify what can we change, right? Where's going to be our impact piece, and then we go from there. So I've had lots of really well-meaning people, they jump right in, and they haven't done a bit of time to just pause for a second and say, okay, what's the culture of this classroom in the school?
Yeah.
What are the policies that we have around equity policies or Indigenous safety and education policies? They're all great, and we need to understand them, and then that helps to inform our work. So, yeah, it's a bit messy. It's lots of activity, lots of movement, and I love it. I love every bit of it. I love seeing things from a district perspective, from the sense of how do we disseminate applied behavior analysis in a really positive way, in a really student-centered way, a collaborative way, like all the things that we've kind of talked about right now. Just all those pieces have to be in place. I think it's important that nobody feels like they're on an island, which is absolutely the case. And I talk about behavior analysts or an educational assistant or a teacher, right? They're doing really challenging work day in, day out, every day. They might feel a bit isolated after a while. So we have to make sure that from a systems level, we're identifying some of those people and how do we make sure that they very much are connected with others. So even if they need to vent for a moment, they can do so. I love now that where people are talking, teachers are talking about antecedents. They're talking about functions of behavior. Like it just warms my heart when I hear some of those things being mentioned by teachers, and then they're thinking, how do I write this behavior support plan with function in mind? I'm like, yes, right, there we go. And so we keep sort of building those pieces along the way. I think, as Jess mentioned earlier, mentioned Pat Fryman, we continue to work and model very much so the emphasis on the student is behaving in a way that's getting their needs met. They've likely come from poor conditions, poor modeling, poor teaching, but that doesn't matter, right? They're still a student at heart, and you can see the soft side in them. Absolutely, you can. We just have to make sure we find that and model that. So all kinds of different things. I'm kind of all over the place on this one because it's done in a systematic way to make sure we align with all of the independent variables that we can control. We identify the ones that we can control, and then we go from there. It's great work.
It sounds like really great work. And honestly, the fact that you started by describing it as chaotic or messy, as messy, just reminds me that like being perfectly controlled isn't really the goal of ABA because it's not generalizable. So the fact that you are in this messy setting and you're navigating that mess and you're kind of working through it and still seeing some results, that's really important because it's helping the skills you're building generalize and be more natural. So that's really cool.
We have to have RBAs in schools feel comfortable with coaching as well. Right. Yeah. We can model all we want, but at a certain point, we have to have a coaching strategy, whether it's BST or some sort of gradual release strategy, because there's lots of one-to-one work, but there are just too many students. There's not enough time. So at some point, we have to make sure that we're investing in our mediators, teachers, paraprofessionals, whomever, to help do that work. And that's hard work too, right? To think, kind of take the coaching stance and then help fade you out while they continue to run whatever the behavior program is. So, right, we have lots of people that are great behavior analysts, but they still need to continue to practice each with some of the coaching stuff.
That's a really cool way to kind of look at it. That's how we can create capacity within schools. Because like you said, there are things that aren't changing, right? You can't put an unlimited number of RBAs in there to provide services because there are some barriers systemic wise that you can't change. So figuring out ways that you can do the best with what you have is really interesting. And earlier, you talked about how now you're seeing teachers kind of talk about reinforcement and talk about function-based learning and how to build a behavior support plan that kind of meets that. And that's really cool. But I have a feeling that it wasn't always like that. It's not like that when new teachers come into the district and they're like, what are you people doing about this? So in your experience, what are some misconceptions that some educators have currently or may have had about behavior analysis or behavior analysts within the school setting or in general?
Where should I start? So I think there was a genuine curiosity about behavior analysts that are now joining, in particular, our school system. But I think it was about the same time when I listened to other school boards across the province. It was about 7 years ago. It seemed that there was gradually sort of this momentum that we had to behavior analysts coming into systems, and so a few things that we had to, I think, really work against. One was the need for external or extrinsic reinforcement versus intrinsic reinforcement.
Yeah. Right.
Shouldn't they just know? Shouldn't they just want to do better? Shouldn't they just want to complete this worksheet and then be able to get out for recess? So we had to make things, again, slowing it down, had to make things more concrete. We had to build in the rationale for why we're going to use extrinsic reinforcement, and then we can fade in certain ways. We've learned tons about practicality. So we can have a leg 2 reinforcement schedule all we want, but people won't know what that is. Right? We can have economies all we want, but as soon as that student goes out on the playground, the token economy is left in the classroom. So we've learned a ton in terms of the practical nature of the ebb and the flow of school systems as well. So I think what I'm leading to is that some of the misconceptions that teachers might have had that I can't do it, this is just too hard. And we've been able to use, I think, a common language, being able to find really efficient ways and fun ways, let's be honest, just fun ways for staff and for students to begin to reinforce, to begin to shape behavior in that way. And then we sort of have some momentum there. And I think there's still a bit of that sort of how do I want to put it? Standoffishness or the rigidity, I'll put it that way, the rigidity of behavior analysts, or the view of behavior analysts, only do things in a very certain way with a very narrow window in terms of how they approach things. I'm hoping that through us having a bit of fun and working hard, being seen in the hallways and on the playground, all that kind of stuff to build that relationship, that we've broken that down. But that was one of the things as well that I think we had to swim upstream for.
Yeah, and I mean, when you see that with a family or with a client, it's really difficult to kind of get through. So I can't even imagine how difficult it was when you're working through a whole system. It's a whole district, right? It's not just one or two families. It's, hundreds of educators that you have to work through and kind of get their buy-in from. And I like the fact that you talked about how you could implement a behavior plan, but as soon as we go into the playground, it's done. Or as soon as they go into second period, it's not being applied. I'm always, I've always shared with my supervisees, it doesn't matter how good you are at writing plans. You could be the best plan writer in the world. But if it's not applicable to the person or to the people who are supposed to implement it, it's a horrible plan, right? It's not a plan that's going to work and it's not going to have effectiveness. So, what strategies have you learned to help ensure that behavior support plans are practical and are realistic in a school setting?
I think in part we have to, I think I mentioned earlier, just be there, be in the setting or settings, typically settings, right? What does the gymnasium look like? What does the music room look like? What does French class look like?
Yeah.
Just a few examples here that tend to be sort of a bit more challenging. Again, in out in the playgrounds, like you have to be able to understand the whole range of things that are happening. So there's the one piece, I think, so the observations. The next is and go back to what was mentioned a few questions ago around quality of life that you're talking with Jessica about. So I would generally frame quality of life a little bit differently in terms of their participation in school. So we have to, I'm always mindful, and I suggest to others to always be mindful of how can they participate most meaningfully in all aspects of their day. And start to think about meaningful. That's really practical. It's contextual. And that begins to sort of break the ice and begin to open up for some shared goals. I think we've done a pretty good job, and I certainly recommend all BAs in schools to begin to co-plan with their students if they're able to as well. Right? So sometimes that's assent-based. Sometimes it's a very much a verbal interaction where you're asking a student, what do you think you need to work on? Right? Ask the teacher, what do you think that student needs to work on? It's pretty interesting how in alignment that often is. Right? The students know. Right? They know what they should and shouldn't be doing. And the teachers, of course, do as well. And so when we start to have sort of a bit of a cluster here, we bring those groups together. We're not necessarily leading it. We might be, but in the background. Right? We're listening to those voices. And in some cases, we're letting the teacher and or the student lead some of those discussions. So I think that really helps with generating some goodwill and generating some really practical participation type goals.
That's a really good way. That's a really good way to approach kind of developing goals that are realistic, right, in the classroom, because and that could apply to folks working in the community with parents in group homes, because again, it doesn't matter how good your goal is if it's not doable within that setting. It's not really a good goal. So the fact that you're taking into account the setting, the interactions, and the things that you can control within that environment when you're implementing programming and adapting as needed, that's really cool and really important. In terms of, and again, we talked about how there's lots of barriers within the school, policies, budgets, etc. In your opinion, though, what do you think school settings could do a little bit better, kind of support students with diverse behavioral and learning needs while also maintaining inclusive classrooms?
So here's where I very much will put on my systems hat. I think that we can all say, well, we need more money, we need more staff, we need more this and more that and more time. Let's not assume any of that's coming. So let's take a look at our current state and try to figure out programs, when I say ways, I mean programs that are sensitive, that are inclusive, all the things that we want to make sure we do, but make sure they're scalable.
Yeah.
And so I'll give an example from my school district. We hired child and youth care practitioners many years ago. They have been an incredible and valuable, impactful role into our school system because they have great training, right? They're so good with kids and youth, and they're able to sort of begin to develop the relationships. They're using some therapeutic practices. Again, it's not therapy, but it's therapeutic type practices. They're using some behavior analysis. And relatively speaking, we're reaching lots of different students, and it's scalable and it's affordable and it's accountable. Right?
Yeah.
We have all sorts of measures that we can make sure we do that. So there's one of the things I think that we have to just try to understand, wrap our brain around, is how can we have a systems level approach to this? There'll always be the need for one-to-one. That's always going to be the case, and that's fine. So where's the systems piece? I think continuing advocacy. So as students change, as school boards change, as things just change in general, how do we change with them? And how can, so I'm really fortunate that I have a seat at many of those tables where I'm able to advocate for, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing changing trends, and I can advocate for new programs or just different allocations of staffing based on what's changed.
Yeah.
A few of those things have been really helpful, I think. And what was the last part of your question there? I think from
how we can keep school classrooms inclusive.
Making classrooms inclusive. So, and I'll give like really small detailed example here. We have a behavior class that runs in one of our elementary schools. And instead of saying, well, that's the behavior class, right? We wouldn't call it that, but I won't name the specific name of it. It's just, it's just the teacher's names class, right? That's just room 202, right? And yeah, students might know, but we're not isolating and stigmatizing that classroom as that's where the behavior kids go, right? They're out very much so at all different times in the school system. We're looking at all sorts of integration opportunities. So there's one, I think, really practical piece where they're just going to be part of the school, right? They're not part of the spec ed piece. They're not part of a behavior piece. They're just part of the classroom in the school. I think all sorts of really practical opportunities to give to them, that they can go and meet other students, that they can take a leadership role or a participatory role at least in making sure they're just out and seen in schools, within the classroom and within the school in general. Then that helps to, I think, destigmatize, helps make everyone have that exposure and just feel more comfortable and develop some relationships and friendships. So a couple things anyway.
That's a really cool approach to inclusion, right? Just something as simple as changing how we are labeling the classroom can be so impactful, because then it's not the kid who has behavior problems that goes to that class. It's the kid in Miss Blank's or Mr. Blank's class, or the kid who goes to room 202 on period 3, right? Like that's really, I think, a really simple way that we can start. And then the other one where you're talking about, mentorship and getting people involved. I feel like the more we get people exposed, like the more we expose people to different demographics, whether it be age, gender, race, ability or disability, or the more we do that, the more we can kind of start, when they leave their schools, they're also going to start making more inclusive areas in other places. So I think that's a really cool approach.
The number of times that I will just mention, I even mentioned it earlier today, behavior's behavior, behaving. And, it may not be the safest way they can do it. It may not be the best way they can do it, but they're just behaving. And so I try not to think too much about topography, generally speaking. I don't want to downplay it. I want everyone to be safe. But, if we just sort of think about that, and that begins to generate, I think, some ways of people's thinking that, right, we're all behaving to get our needs met. And I think, again, I'm trying to destigmatize.
Yeah.
Right. They look a bit different, or quite a bit different from what you might see in the rest of the school, but they're just behaving.
That's a really cool approach to kind of explain to everybody what it is your job is and what it is you're doing. That's really cool.
I love the extra layer of empathy that comes from that. Right?
Yeah.
That like they're just behaving to get their needs met, which implies they're not getting their needs met. This person needs something. And under different situations, you also need something that sometimes you're not getting. And so I think we don't give kids, especially in elementary school, enough credit. Sometimes we think we have to be in their face about things all the time. But I think positioning language like that this is just behaving, they're just trying to get their needs met, makes it feel so much more empathetic and also no big deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
It brings back that humanity into behavior analysis, right? It brings back that aspect of people first, everything else kind of comes secondary. So that's really cool. I really like that approach. Switching gears a little bit to both of you, what's one thing you hope people in the field start doing a little bit differently? Jess, we'll start with you.
Well, in the field, start doing a little bit differently. I think kind of as I was listening to Brian talk a lot about his role, we do very different jobs, but a lot of this is the same, right? A lot of this is really just talking about, how are we working in systems to improve things?
Yeah.
How are we inspiring new generations of folks? How are we balancing sort of science? But, I started in hey, you can control behavior in this 8x8 therapy room where of course you can. Like there's nothing else here. You should be able to do this.
Yeah.
And then, as our field has grown and shifted, we're both now in these situations where like, oh, but out there, right? Out there, how do we help improve people's lives? Out there, how do we, maintain these sort of still behavior analytic principles with integrity? And so for me, that's what I want behavior analysts to do, is to be thinking big picture. And it's not that people don't. I think lots of people do this and they're doing it great. But I think really focusing on outcomes, on quality of life, on thinking of people as people, and whether that's a 3-year-old that I'm working with, whether that's, a 40-year-old that I am working with, whether that's a center or a residential care or somewhere that I'm consulting to or a system that I'm consulting to, really thinking a lot about this is a person, and how are we going to, really think about their quality of life for whatever matters for them. But also, what do we have to, thinking about when we can put resources into working with children, what skills do I have to teach you so that people will give you more autonomy in your life, right? We can't just say, you're right, we should let you have more freedom. Off you go into the world, cross your fingers, right? I mean, that's, none of us did that with our kids, right? Like we are doing that based on what you can show me you were able to handle. And so I think we have to really, where we have the most resources in earlier learning, maybe not exactly how we would like it to be or it should be, but we still have disproportionate resources into childhood learning. I think we need to be very mindful of what's going to happen for this person when they're older, and how am I teaching you things that you're going to use and are going to actually make a difference? Can you make safe choices? Can you problem solve? Can you communicate effectively? Can you tolerate no and uncomfortable situations? And all of these things that are going to maybe be harder to teach now than, can you play this Connect 4 game with me and do this jigsaw puzzle? But also that's what's going to allow people to make sure you have more, self-determination and autonomy when you're older.
I like that. So your advice is pretty much, don't be scared to.
I have to say all these things, and Jamie's like, okay, let's try and frame this in a little bit to something useful.
No, it's all useful, and I think it's really important, right? But what I kind of took from it is like, don't be scared to get in the messy situations and teach your clients to navigate through the messiness of everyday life, right? Everyday life is never, step 1, step 2, step 3. It's messy, like Brian was saying. So that advice is really good. And when paired up with build the skills now that are going to be more difficult to build when they're older, that's really important, because I work with adults, and the amount of times where, we could have managed with, it would have been easier to manage a meltdown when they were 3, 4, 5 over tolerance or whatever, versus now when they're 30 and they're adults and they're big and strong, all of that is super important.
But I think the messy situations, that's what people are scared of when we don't allow for autonomy and independence. Right? If we think everything's going to go perfectly, you're going to get on the bus here, you're going to ring the bell at the right stop, you're going to get off and you're going to make it home. No one's worried about that. We're worried about all those messy situations, but we're scared to teach in those messy situations because I don't really have that stuff on my program, and I'm not really sure exactly what to do there. And so again, that still goes back to this. We have to be good scientists and we have to be good behavior analysts so we can teach in messy situations. So when that client encounters that messy situation because they were afforded some independence, we can say, yeah, but you've done this before. They've done this before. They can do this. They had some teaching in this area. And so I think it all kind of relates back.
That's really cool. Brian, same question for you.
Jess had a really fantastic learner or student center. So I'm going to shift a little bit. You've said it beautifully. I think, it is messy, but it's incredibly important. It doesn't take long to fast forward 5 or 10 years, and you'll know absolutely why that skill is vital to keep everyone safe. So if I move away, the shift from the focus from learners to RBAs or future RBAs, a few things that I would highly recommend. One is give yourself some time. There is tremendous pressure. I know there's tremendous pressure in all sorts of organizations, school districts, private organizations, not-for-profit organizations, to keep going and rush. The learning history is such that it's going to take time, right? To shape, modulate that behavior, to build the skills, to counteract the behavior, whatever needs to happen in that case. So give yourself the grace of a little bit of time. Absolutely find a mentor. Kind of what I was saying before, find your people, find a mentor. I've been incredibly lucky to be the recipient of several really wonderful mentors, and they all have had just a little bit of a different impact on me that sort of collectively got me to where I am right now. So I would highly recommend seek out a mentor if you don't already have one. And I think RBAs run the risk, if you don't have a good mentor, if you haven't allowed yourself the gift of a little bit of time, it's always well-meaning. I'm not going to suggest otherwise. But if you begin to blur the lines of your scope of competence, that's a challenge, right? That's a problem of practice. And so I think to maintain that scope, right, give yourself time, understand whether this is something that you should be taking on or maybe just a portion of. Be able to bounce it with other people and get some ideas from others or a mentor that you trust to begin to sort of think to make sure that you're practicing within your scope and ethically, but also all the other things that come with that, which is added pressure, concerns about try to do the right thing, but you're not sure, which is, right, the job's hard enough. We don't need to create different scenarios where now we're having additional pressure on our shoulders. So those would be a few things that I really hope that, and again, RBAs of all vintages, whether you're newly minted or whether you've been in practice for
I like vintages. Okay.
That's something to seek out. Yeah, some of an older vintage than others.
That's awesome. That's really good.
But those of us of an older vintage, I think for me, the role of mentorship in lots of sort of what Brian just said, right? That I also been very, very fortunate to collect lots of mentors over the years, lots of, not one, right? Because this person has helped shape this and this person has helped shape this and this person I haven't talked to in a long time, but I know they're going to be able to help me with this thing. And so us older vintage behavior analysts, I think, really understand the value of that. And so really encouraging people to just hang on to those. And my favorite thing is when I get messages from, staff I worked with years ago or students I taught years ago that are like, just wanted to let you know, I was thinking about you and I was teaching this, client this really important skill. And I'm like, yes, it's so heartwarming on the other side. So
likewise,
That's really good advice. And what I took away from it is like, give yourself the grace to know that you can't fix everything within the first 20 minutes of a client. And I feel like that is the pressure that we all have because, a lot of us, again, work with clients with really challenging behavior, and it creates a lot of barriers in their life. And the want to kind of fix that and reduce the level of barriers in their life is really high, right? But it's impossible to get that fixed or to reduce that within the first week. And that could be really difficult for a lot of us to kind of manage. And the second aspect of like taking mentors, I think that's also really important because a lot of us, I think especially us younger, and I'm going to make myself younger than I actually am, but us younger behavior
It's an
analysts,
interesting divide you're putting in here, Jamie. That's fine. Carry on.
we growing up in that era of in the era of social media where everything is out there for people to see and you got to let people kind of see only the positives. It could feel really defeating when you need to reach out to somebody for help. So knowing that asking for help isn't a deficit and doesn't make you any less skilled, knowledgeable, or professional, that advice I think is really, really key.
Agreed. Yeah.
I would add to that, Jamie. I think, when I got my BCBA in 2009, I was one of like 60 something in Ontario, right? We were working in roles where to work in a behavior analyst level role, there wasn't very many of those, right? We put in a lot of time. I'm now leaning into our divide, and I have now created an us, you and me, Brian, versus Jamie, sort of a divide. But personally, I spent a lot of time working in direct roles. I spent a lot of time, not working in more senior supervisory roles. And they just weren't there. That's not, our field wasn't there yet. And so it's incredible to be on this side of that to say, I see job ads and employment opportunities for RBAs all over the place. And look how many RBAs certified when the college came out, and like all of these great things. And I see where students are going and where, people are going into great opportunities. And it's great that our field is now so big that we can support those opportunities.
Yeah.
But in the same realm of sort of spending time when you're figuring things out, spend some time learning, right? Spend time, even if you're jumping into great roles, make sure you're in positions where you're supported. You're in positions where you have supervision, for a long time, not just for a year, for, time to figure out. Behavior is complex and our field is hard. And so, we have to be able to afford some time to learn and to not be the person in charge right away, because that's scary and that's hard and that's legal and pressure and all kinds of things, right? So it's great that our field has expanded into all these great opportunities, but I think we have to, don't feel like you have to jump into those. Take some time.
And it's really, I think, refreshing to hear like behavior analysts of your vintage and your experience to share that you still have mentors that you'll reach out to, that you still have people who you rely on. Because I think it's a really good symbol and sign for younger behavior analysts or newer behavior analysts that it's okay and it's actually better. It makes you a better behavior analyst to have that.
To pull it back to ONTABA, one of the things I actually think is an important opportunity is to get to work as a part of a board, because I don't get to make any decisions on my own, right? All of the decisions, I am working in consultation with people that I am learning all kinds of things from. Some of them are like, hey, I'm, young and I know how to do these things. And that's, skill sets that I don't have. But people that are really in touch with students, people that are in touch with different parts of our field. And so it's an important opportunity, I think, to be able to really push that back to say, we're all bringing something different to the board, and we're all bringing a different experience, a different place in life, a different learning history. And it's so valuable. And I have already learned things from working in this board and from working in the past board to say like, oh, I have learned tons of things from people that were not in my skill set or that I didn't know about, or that I just needed to say, hey, can somebody read this thing before I send it? Or do you think this is the right thing? Or should we respond? Or shouldn't we do this? It's very, it's just been such a great learning opportunity from that side.
And if people wanted to take advantage of that learning, how can they get involved with the board?
Just slip that in. So we will have formal board positions that vacate around conference time, so in the fall. So there'll be a good handful of positions that will be up for people to take on. There'll be some director at large positions, the student positions. So always being able to sort of be a part of that. We always put our call for volunteers out early in the year, but being able to, jump into committees. We talk about, sometimes it feels a bit intimidating. You're like, I'm going to volunteer for this committee. I don't really know anything about this. I've never done it. That's okay. You're not the only person on that committee. So, jumping in and volunteering little bits of time doesn't have to be a huge time commitment. Everybody is busy. Everybody has a lot on their plate. So, getting involved in those sorts of things. And at the bare minimum, I think just following what we're doing. Spend some time, look through some resources, follow social media, attend some webinars and, some in-person events, and just get to know people. They will pull you in to helping them and doing things. You don't have to worry about that part. But, just getting to know that community is a good first step.
That's really good. And again, being part of ONTABA really opened lots of doors for me that I don't think otherwise I would have had. I don't think I would have made friends with people like you, Jess, and you, Brian, and got to meet some really awesome people. And I always tell students, make sure you're part of ONTABA, whether it is as a volunteer, whether it's as a member or as a board member, just be part of it, because the doors that it'll open for you in the field are huge. To kind of wrap up, in your opinions, how can behavior analysts make ABA more accessible in Ontario? And when I say more accessible, I mean more understandable, more known, more applicable in general. We'll start with Brian.
I think it's valuable for us to not complicate things.
Yeah.
There may be a very complicated procedure, but if we can task analyze it and trickle it out, that's going to help. When I think about some of the literature that is really dense, but when you go through it a second time, you can just pull out about 2 or 3 things. It's typically what I do at a conference as well. Mm-hmm. Great speakers, I'm really sort of enthusiastic about what they have to say, and I walk away with really sort of pulling 2 or 3 things away. And so I think that's okay, right? We can be okay with that. So if we have really great practice, we've talked lots about rapport and being open and collaborative. But if we can begin to sort of just take those small steps towards a larger goal, which is typically behavior analysis, that would really help people, I think, get on board a little bit. I think joining not only ONTABA, but joining other boards, other committees, right? Be part of an equity committee, whatever the organization is. Be part of a Spirit Day committee. Who knows, right? The sky's the limit, but getting you out there, seated at the table besides other members and other professions, incredibly important. And I think eventually, right, that's just going to lead to better relationships and just lead to perhaps demystifying behavior analysis or behavior analysts and sort of who they are and what they do and some of those things. I think it's just really sort of practical, fun ways that you can just get involved. You can meet other people and do some of those pieces. And then finally, I would say that if we can always keep students or learners at heart, right? We can circle back around. I'm sure we've all had lots of really difficult conversations, sometimes with families, sometimes with supervisors, management, whoever it might be. You circle back around to the fact that we're all sitting here because we're so concerned about this particular child or this particular youth, right? It's just an easy way to circle back around and refocus. And then from there, you think, well, of course, we're all here for that. Or we all want the same things. We want the best possible outcomes for this particular child or youth. So those would be a few things I would say. Right, that's how we can just begin to break down the barriers, whether they're perceived or not, and then begin to sort of just naturalize our interactions with lots of people.
I love that. Jess, same question for you.
I think all the things that we've talked about, all of us so far, help lead to some of that, right? So what Brian said, better rapport, being more approachable, thinking about systems level change, right? We're really good at individual. That's our superpower. That's what our science does, and that's great. But it's been clear, I think, that the lack of scalability or a lack of attention to scalability has limited what we are doing compared to what we could be doing. But I think mine is a more, I don't know, I think really, really being a behaviorist, taking a circumstances view in how we approach all of the things. When I look at someone that is up against that is showing resistance to sort of what I'm talking about, or a parent that I'm trying to get through with that is just disengaging, or when I talk to somebody, they say, "What are you doing?" And I say, "Behavior analyst," and they're like, "Ugh." Instead of reacting to that and either disengaging ourselves or being annoyed or whatever, really being able to take a circumstances view and think, okay, so behavior is behavior. What's in their learning history? What's in their motivation? What is, their past experiences with behavior analysis been? Maybe the only thing they've ever heard is that bad news story that they saw once, and that's all they've got. So of course that's their reaction. I think behavior analysis is very compassionate. I think it's a much more compassionate way to approach many, many problems in individuals or in sort of bigger societal things. But we sometimes lose, I can be a clinical behaviorist, or I can apply behavior analytic principles in this workplace. And then I go out into the world and I sort of adopt a mentalistic approach and a blame-driven approach. And I think that's okay. We'll do that a little bit. But it doesn't help us fix anything.
Yeah.
And so if we really want to fix things, if we really want to change things, if we really want people to hear us or care about what we have to say or let us try, we have to really step back and think about, for real, what are the circumstances that are preventing that? And be a good behavior analyst, and we know how to do that. So if we can remember that we know how to do that, then I think that the limits to what we can contribute to society are much wider than we are or think we are now.
I love that. I love all of that. And I think that's a really good way to wrap up this episode. Thank you both so much for the time today and the insights. I learned so much from both of you, and I'm super excited to see how you carry ONTABA forward. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for reigniting this, Jamie. I think it's exciting.
It was my pleasure. I love it.
Great. Thank you.